Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Let's do it.
This time we're diving headfirst into all the latest happenings in the world of cybersecurity.
Sounds exciting.
It is.
Yeah.
We've been, sifting through a ton of news articles, reports, the usual.
Right.
Just to get a sense of what are the big stories right now.
Absolutely.
So we're talking data breaches, new malware threats, the vulnerabilities that,
Yeah, the things that keep you up at night.
Exactly.
Exactly.
It's amazing, when you start piecing it all together, you see how it's all connected.
Right.
All these incidents, whether it's stolen medical records or even, donuts.
Donuts. No.
They all point to these larger trends that are happening.
It's true. It's true. So let's jump right in.
Okay.
One of the biggest stories lately has been this data breach at the Center for Vein Restoration.
Yeah, this one's a big deal.
A lot of people impacted.
Over 445,000. It's not just names and addresses, though.
Right, right. We're talking Social Security numbers, health insurance info, even patient diagnoses.
That's some serious stuff.
It is. This kind of information is gold to cyber criminals.
So, beyond just, the usual, credit card fraud, what does this mean for someone whose health data has been, stolen?
Think about it. Someone could use your identity to get medical treatment, prescriptions even.
Oh, wow.
It could really mess with your medical records, leading to misdiagnoses or incorrect treatment down the line.
Wow.
And then there's the potential for blackmail.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it's scary stuff.
Really scary. And it shows how vulnerable all that sensitive information really is.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just healthcare. Even Krispy Kreme got hit.
Ah, yeah, the donuts.
Remember, when you couldn't order your donuts online?
Yeah.
Well, it turns out
It was a cyber attack.
it wasn't just a website glitch.
Cyber criminals disrupted their online orders, impacted their digital sales.
I guess even donuts aren't safe these days.
Yeah. No, it just shows you even seemingly minor disruptions can have a huge financial impact.
On any business, really.
Exactly.
Okay, so speaking of attacks, let's talk about the evolving malware landscape.
Right.
Two names have been popping up a lot: ZLoader and Antidote.
Yeah, two sneaky newcomers.
What can you tell us about these?
Well, ZLoader is a banking Trojan. It's been around, but it's back with some new tricks.
Okay.
It's using this technique called DNS tunneling, makes it almost invisible.
DNS tunneling.
Yeah, it's a bit technical.
So break it down for us.
Okay, imagine internet traffic is like a highway, right? And DNS requests are like these little delivery vans.
Okay, I'm following.
ZLoader hides its activity within those DNS requests.
So it's basically blending in with the legitimate traffic.
Exactly. Makes it very hard to detect.
Clever, but scary.
Yeah.
What about Antidote? What's the deal with that one?
Antidote is all about stealth. It targets Android devices, disguises itself as legitimate software. Like, you think you're applying for a job, but you're actually downloading malware.
Yikes.
Yeah, it steals your financial information. And what's really concerning is it exploits Android's accessibility services, the features designed to help users with disabilities.
Right.
This malware twists it to gain access to banking apps, crypto wallets, even bypasses lock screens.
So even our phones aren't safe.
No, it seems like every day there's a new threat.
It can be overwhelming.
It can, but there is some good news.
Oh, good.
Law enforcement is starting to fight back. There was this Operation Power Off.
I think I read about that.
They dismantled 27 DDoS-for-hire platforms.
DDoS attacks, those are the ones that flood a website with traffic, right?
Exactly. These
Right.
so-called booter services make it easy for anyone to launch a DDoS attack.
So taking them down is a big win.
Huge win for businesses and internet users.
Shows that collaboration can really make a difference.
Absolutely. But the fight's not over. Criminals are always evolving, always looking for new vulnerabilities.
Which brings us to the vulnerabilities that everyone needs to be aware of.
Right. There are a few that stand out.
Any in particular?
There was a flaw in Microsoft Azure MFA that really caught my eye.
Wait, MFA, multi-factor authentication. But that was supposed to be super secure.
You'd think so, but this vulnerability let attackers bypass MFA for popular Microsoft services.
Like Outlook, OneDrive.
Yep, exploited weaknesses in the time-based one-time password system.
So they could basically just brute force their way in.
Pretty much, without triggering any alerts.
So even our most trusted security measures can fail.
It's a good reminder to always keep your software updated.
Not just for new features, but for those security patches.
Exactly. Think of them like a flu shot for your computer.
Makes sense. Any other vulnerabilities we should be on the lookout for?
Atlassian and Splunk, two really widely used software platforms, they've also had to scramble to patch some serious flaws.
What kind of flaws?
The ones in Atlassian could have given attackers control over entire systems.
And Splunk.
Splunk had a flaw that could have been exploited for remote code execution, basically giving attackers full control.
So updates are essential.
Absolutely, no matter what software you're using.
Okay, so keep your software updated. Got it.
Right.
What about mobile devices, though? Are those safe?
Well, unfortunately, no device is completely immune.
Right.
Recently, a vulnerability in the TCC iOS subsystem was discovered. It exposed iCloud data to malicious apps.
So even Apple devices, which are known for being secure.
Yeah, even those can have vulnerabilities.
What about this LDAP client vulnerability I keep hearing about?
Ah, yes. That one allowed remote code execution on vulnerable systems.
How bad.
It stems from something called a race condition, basically a timing issue in the software.
So like a glitch in the system.
Yeah, you could say that.
Hackers can slip through the crack.
Exactly, which is why proactive patching and vulnerability management are so important.
You can't just assume your systems are secure. You need to actively monitor them.
Right, address any weaknesses as soon as possible.
Okay, so we've got data breaches, new malware, vulnerabilities everywhere. It feels like a losing battle sometimes.
I know, it can feel that way.
But it's not time to give up, right?
No, not at all. There are things we can do to fight back, things we can do to protect ourselves.
Okay, good.
But before we get into those, I think it's important to look at the bigger picture.
Bigger picture.
There are some emerging trends shaping how these threats are evolving. Two reports in particular caught my attention.
What reports?
One highlighted the surge in open source malware. The other raised concerns about container security.
Open source malware. Isn't open source software supposed to be more secure because anyone can look at the code?
In theory, yes, but the reality is a bit more complicated.
How so?
The open source ecosystem, with all its libraries of code and less strict author verification, well, it's become a breeding ground for malicious packages.
So it's like a double-edged sword.
You could say that, and we've actually seen a 200% increase in open source malware since 2023.
Wow, that's a huge jump.
It is, and it's being driven by a few things. Ease of access, the sheer volume of packages, and a lack of robust security in many open source repositories.
So finding safe software is getting harder.
It can be. You really need to know what you're looking for.
What about container security? What's happening there?
Containers, you know those lightweight software packages used to build and run applications?
Yeah, I've heard of them.
They're efficient, flexible, but they can also introduce new security risks.
What kind of risks?
A study found that the average container image contains over 600 known vulnerabilities.
That many?
Yeah, it's like building a house on a foundation full of cracks.
You're not wrong.
And this brings us to a crucial point. The human factor.
The human factor.
Are we becoming too complacent about cybersecurity?
Complacent. But with all these breaches and vulnerabilities, it seems like we're constantly being warned.
That's true, but all that bad news can have a strange effect.
What do you mean?
It can lead to what's called data breach fatigue.
Data breach fatigue.
People become desensitized to the warnings, they get overwhelmed and start to tune it out.
It's like the cybersecurity version of crying wolf.
Exactly. We've heard it so many times we stop paying attention.
And the cybercriminals, they know this.
Of course, they're counting on it.
So they're taking advantage of it.
Absolutely, with increasingly sophisticated phishing campaigns.
Phishing scams. I thought those were getting easier to spot.
Unfortunately, no, they're getting better at hiding.
How so?
One recent campaign targeted employees across 12 different industries using all sorts of tricks.
Like what?
They're abusing trusted domains, mimicking company branding, even impersonating legitimate document platforms.
So they look like the real deal.
Exactly. Even tech-savvy people can fall victim.
It's not enough to just be careful about what you click anymore.
No, you need to scrutinize every email, every link, every request for information.
So much to think about.
It is, and I think that's a good place to pause for now.
There's a lot to digest. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have. The cybersecurity landscape is more complex than ever.
But we're not done yet, right?
Right. In part 2, we'll dive into some proactive measures you can take to protect yourself.
So stay tuned, everyone. Knowing is half the battle, and we'll be back to give you the knowledge you need to stay safe.
Absolutely. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're in the thick of it now, exploring the ever-changing world of cybersecurity.
That's right, we are.
Last time we covered some of the latest threats making headlines.
Data breaches, malware, vulnerability, the whole shebang.
Yeah, the whole shebang.
Yeah.
But it's not all doom and gloom, right?
Not at all. We're not here to scare you. We're here to equip you.
Right. You need the tools.
Exactly. And understanding the threats is just the first step.
Okay, so now we know what's out there.
Now we figure out how to fight back.
How to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
So what's the best defense in this digital arms race?
That's a good question. And it's true. The bad guys often seem to have the upper hand.
They do. They do.
But the good news is you don't need to be a cybersecurity expert to take effective steps to protect yourself.
Okay, that's good to hear.
It all starts with the basics. Strong passwords, enabling multi-factor authentication, and keeping your software updated.
Okay, the classic cybersecurity tips.
The classics for a reason.
But are those really enough these days? I mean, we talked about how even MFA can be bypassed.
You're right. Those are just the foundation, the starting point.
So how do we take it a step further? How do we build on those basics?
Let's talk passwords first. Don't just make them strong. Make them impossible to guess.
Okay, how do we do that?
Use a combination of upper and lowercase letters, numbers, symbols, the whole 9 yards.
Right.
And consider using a password manager.
A password manager.
Yeah, it's like a digital vault for all your passwords. You only need to remember one master password.
Okay, so it takes some of the pressure off trying to remember a million different passwords.
Exactly. It's a huge help.
What about software updates? Any tips there?
Don't ignore those update notifications. They might seem annoying, but they're crucial.
Okay.
They often contain security patches. Think of them like a flu shot for your computer.
Okay, so strong passwords, MFA, keep software updated. Check, check, check.
Yeah.
What else should we be thinking about?
Think about how you interact with the digital world. Be mindful of phishing scams.
Right, those are always a threat.
And they're getting more sophisticated, so scrutinize every email, especially those that seem urgent or too good to be true.
If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Exactly. Don't click on any links that look suspicious. Hover over them first to see the full URL.
Okay, good tip.
Be wary of unsolicited requests for information. If something feels off, trust your gut.
That's always good advice.
It is. And don't be afraid to report suspicious activity.
Okay, so that's good advice for individuals, but what about organizations? How can they protect themselves and their employees?
Organizations need to take a multi-layered approach to cybersecurity.
What do you mean by that?
It means investing in security solutions, things like firewalls, data loss prevention tools.
Right, the technical side of things.
Exactly. But it also means prioritizing employee training.
Right, we talked about how data breach fatigue can make employees more vulnerable to phishing attacks.
That's why security awareness training is so important.
So they know what to look out for.
Exactly. Teach them how to spot and avoid phishing scams, how to handle sensitive data responsibly, and how to report suspicious activity.
Okay, so it's about creating a culture of cybersecurity awareness within the organization.
You got it. Cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility, from the CEO to the intern.
So we've talked a lot about defense, but are there any offensive strategies that organizations can use?
There are, and they can be very effective. One is ethical hacking, also known as penetration testing.
So you're saying organizations should hire hackers?
Not just any hackers, ethical hackers. These are security professionals who use the same tools and techniques as the bad guys, but with permission.
So they're trying to break in to find the weak spot.
Exactly. They provide valuable insights into potential vulnerabilities and recommend ways to improve security.
It's like a controlled experiment.
You could say that it's a proactive approach to staying ahead of the curve.
So we've talked about what individuals and organizations can do. But is there anyone else who has a role to play in this fight against cybercrime?
Cybersecurity is ultimately a shared responsibility. It's not just on IT departments or security professionals.
It goes beyond that.
It does. It's on software vendors, policymakers, everyone who uses the internet.
How can everyone contribute?
Software vendors need to prioritize security in the development process, building secure applications from the ground up and providing timely updates.
Okay, so secure software by design.
Exactly. And policymakers need to enact laws and regulations that deter cybercrime and protect users' privacy.
Right, so a legal framework to support it all.
And of course, individuals need to be aware of the risks and take steps to protect themselves.
So it's a team effort.
That's the key. Collaboration, information sharing, a collective effort to make the digital world a safer place.
Okay, I'm starting to feel a little more optimistic.
Good, good.
But with cyber threats constantly evolving, how can we make sure our defenses stay effective?
That's where continuous monitoring and adaptation come in. And this applies to both individuals and organizations.
So it's not a one-time thing, it's an ongoing process.
Exactly. Don't just set it and forget it. Stay informed about emerging threats, assess your security posture regularly, and adjust your defenses accordingly.
Okay, so it's a never-ending journey.
Cybersecurity is a journey, not a destination.
Well said. So what does all this mean for our listeners? What are the key takeaways here?
The most important message is you are not powerless. Even though the threat landscape is complex and constantly changing, there are concrete steps you can take to protect yourself and your organization.
So don't panic, but don't be complacent either.
Exactly. Stay informed, be proactive, and remember, cybersecurity is a shared responsibility.
Great advice. But before we wrap up this part of the deep dive, I have one more question.
Shoot.
We've talked about the technical side of cybersecurity, but what about the legal and ethical implications?
Yes. The legal and ethical side of things, it's a complex and often overlooked area.
It does seem like a whole other layer to this conversation.
It is a very important layer, and I think it deserves its own deep dive.
Well, it sounds like we have a topic for a future episode.
Definitely.
But for now, let's take a break, and we'll be back with the final part of this cybersecurity deep dive, where we'll explore those legal and ethical considerations in more detail. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been on quite a journey, haven't we, exploring the ins and outs of cybersecurity.
We have. From data breaches to sneaky malware, vulnerabilities, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have. And we talked about how to protect ourselves, how to fight back.
Right, those practical steps are crucial.
But there's another side to all of this that we haven't really touched on yet.
The legal and ethical considerations.
Yeah, that's right. It seems like as our lives become, well, more and more digital,
More intertwined with the digital world, for sure.
the legal and ethical implications of cybersecurity, they just become, well, more important.
They do, and it's a complex landscape, constantly evolving.
So let's unpack this a little bit. When we talk about the legal side of cybersecurity, what are we really talking about?
Well, there's a whole web of laws and regulations that touch on cybersecurity in some way.
A web.
But some of the key areas include data protection and privacy,
Right.
intellectual property rights, and then, of course, the laws related to cybercrime itself.
Okay, so those are the big buckets: data protection and privacy. Those are hot topics these days.
They are definitely on top of mind for a lot of people.
We all hear about GDPR, that big data protection law over in Europe.
Right, the General Data Protection Regulation.
But what about here in the U.S.? Do we have anything like that?
Well, the U.S. doesn't have one single federal law like GDPR.
Oh.
It's more of a patchwork, I guess you could say. A
patchwork.
patchwork of federal and state laws that govern data privacy. It can get a little complicated
How so?
because the rules can vary depending on what kind of data we're talking about, what industry.
So it's not as straightforward as we might think.
Not exactly, no.
Can you give us an example of how these laws actually, well, play out in the real world?
Sure. Let's take healthcare data, for example. There's a specific law called HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act.
IPA. Right, I've heard of that.
Sets really strict standards for protecting patient information.
And if those standards aren't met...
There can be serious consequences.
So remember that data breach at the Center for Vein Restoration?
I do, yes.
If they're found to have violated HIPAA regulations, they could be in big trouble.
They could, potentially facing fines, lawsuits.
Wow. So these laws, they have some teeth.
They do. They're not just suggestions.
Organizations need to take them seriously.
Absolutely. Ignoring them is not an option.
So we've got data protection. That's one piece. What about intellectual property? Where does that fit in?
Intellectual property is another area where cybersecurity is essential.
We're talking patents, trademarks, trade secrets, that kind of thing.
Exactly. These are valuable assets, and they need to be protected.
But how does cybersecurity actually protect them?
Well, think about it. Cyber attacks can be used to steal intellectual property,
Oh, right.
giving competitors an unfair advantage. It's like digital espionage.
So it's about preventing those kinds of attacks.
That's a big part of it, yes. Making sure those valuable assets are secure.
And then there are the laws that specifically target cybercrime itself.
Right. Governments all over the world have laws that criminalize various cyber activities.
Like hacking.
Hacking, malware distribution, online fraud, identity theft, the list goes on.
We talked about Operation Power Off, which took down those DDoS-for-hire services.
Yes, and that operation was successful because there are laws in place that make those kinds of attacks illegal.
So it's good to know there's a legal framework to, well, to go after these cyber criminals.
There is. It's constantly being updated and refined as new threats emerge.
Laws and regulations, they're one side of the coin. But what about the ethical side?
Ethics. It's a crucial aspect of cybersecurity, but often overlooked.
It does seem like as technology advances, we're running into more and more ethical dilemmas.
We are. It's like we're constantly navigating uncharted territory.
Can you give us some examples of these ethical challenges?
Sure. One of the biggest dilemmas is balancing security and privacy.
Right, I can see how that would be tricky.
It is. As we implement stronger security measures, we often need to collect more data about people.
To track potential threats, I guess.
But we need to do that responsibly, ethically.
Without being too intrusive.
Exactly. Respecting people's privacy rights is essential.
Okay, so balancing security and privacy, that's one challenge.
Another is the question of responsible vulnerability disclosure.
Vulnerability disclosure.
When security researchers find vulnerabilities in software, they have a responsibility to report them.
So they can be fixed.
Right. But there's a debate about how much information to make public. Too much detail could help attackers exploit the flaw.
So it's a delicate balance.
It is. Transparency versus protection.
And then there are the ethical questions about the use of certain cybersecurity technologies themselves.
Like facial recognition technology. It's becoming increasingly common, but it raises concerns about surveillance, potential misuse.
It seems like every new technology comes with its own set of ethical challenges.
It does. It's inevitable. And that's why ongoing dialogue and ethical reflection are so important in cybersecurity.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways for our listeners when it comes to, well, the legal and ethical stuff?
I think the most important message is this. Cybersecurity is not just a technical issue.
Right.
It's deeply intertwined with legal and ethical considerations.
Individuals and organizations need to be aware of both.
Absolutely. Understand the laws, the regulations that govern their digital activities.
And act responsibly.
Always.
And it sounds like, much like with the technical side of things, staying informed is key.
It is. The legal and ethical landscape, it's constantly changing. It's a continuous learning process.
Well, I've certainly learned a lot from our deep dive today.
Me too. It's been a fascinating journey.
For our listeners out there, remember, knowledge is power. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and stay curious about the world of cybersecurity. And that's a wrap on the deep dive.